So what you want to do is you want to find out what your computer standard, what your computer is, and then that's, or whatever surface you're going to project on. If you buy a projector, it'll tell you on it its natural, its native project pixel size, right? And pixels are how many, each pixel can define a color. And the more pixels you have, the more detailed a picture is. So if you think about like one of those a pointillism drawing, like the Sunday in the Park pointillism, right? The dots, if you get really close, you can see each individual dot's a different color, but if you get really far away, you can see everything in a lot of detail. So basically, a phone or a screen of any kind is, there's individual pixels, dots, DPIs, dots per inch if you're printing. Your resolution is how many pixels you determine. So for every square inch on the screen, you'll have 300 pixels per inch, right? You can lower this number. If you make it 70 pixels per inch, your file will be a lot smaller, but you won't have as good as quality. I usually start with 300 pixels an inch. If you're printing something, you can work in inches, so you can just tell it what size you want it to be inch-wise. There are, orientations, so if you want, it can help you switch things around. For me, I'm going to work in pixels, and I know that my projector is 1920 by 1280. Or I'm going to use my computer screen for this, right? And I'm going to go with 300 pixels per inch of resolution. That's good. Everything else usually comes standard and is just fine. If this naturally says 70 or 80 or something like that, just up it to 300. It will be worth it, I promise. Okay, we're going to create a new surface. So this basically gives me my Photoshop background that I'm working in, right? It's usually just a blank screen. It's a background layer, which means it's locked. It's way of preserving the background so you don't have anything, you can't affect it if you don't want to. If you double click it, it will basically, you can select it and hit enter, and it now turns it off and it just functions as a normal layer. Now I can erase it, I can turn it on and off, I can interact with it however I need. Okay. The eyeball here is super beneficial because when you turn it off, you can get rid of layers. So if you have many, many different layers, you can turn everything off that you don't need. You can also work in folders. So if I'm working on this, I'm going to call this my background. So this is going to be my background folder. Normally when I'm working, I will keep a white layer in my background just as to make sure you can see through. If I delete something, I want to see a very vibrant background behind it so I can see if I missed something, and we'll talk more about that later. But when I'm working on this, if you turn it off, this checkered surface is your computer's way of representing the negative space, the alpha space that we talked about. If I just save this right now as a file, it would just be a blank surface. You could see through it completely if I saved it as a PNG, right? But that checkered board is its way of vector telling you what you're seeing is not your image. Okay, so if you zoom in really far, see how I keep zooming in and the checkers stay the exact same size? That's because they're just notating that this is background that nothing exists in. If you save it as a JPEG, it will fill in white wherever there is this surface. If you don't fill it in and you use a PNG, it will just, treat it as clear. That's what we're going to call it. Think of it like a translucent sheet. Okay. So I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to create a new layer because I also want to have a very bold, vibrant color as a background. Because again, if I'm working on something that's a very bright white image and I have my white background on, I can't tell if I'm missing something or not. So maybe I'll do black, or maybe I'll do a color. For this, I'm just going to go ahead and do red just so it's nice and bright. Who doesn't love a good red? And so I can come over here and make the entire surface red by just clicking the tool, the paint bucket, and then I click on the surface and it makes it that color. Ooh, that changes my screen light. Command Z or Control Z if you're on a PC, Command Z if you're on a Mac, undoes that so that I can undo that because that looked terrible. If you change the color, your tool does that same thing, okay? If you hit Option and Delete, you can make it do it automatically. So holding Option and hitting Delete will just take whatever your main color is and it will fill it on the entire surface that you have or any surface you have selected, okay? If I hit Command Delete, that will do the opposite and it'll give me the lower color. So my underneath color, my backup color. So if I want to make a background that color, I can hit Command Delete and it'll make that entire layer and you can see. I can make a new layer, and if I hit Option Delete, it'll make me a blue layer, right? So now I have a blue one, I have a black one, I have a white one. And they all work in succession top down. So if I turn the blue one on and I have anything else on behind it, you cannot see through the blue one, right? If I turn the blue one off, you can only see the black one and not to the white one. If I turn the blue one on and I go to my erase tool, I can erase through and I can see the black. If I select the black layer, okay, so I'm highlighted in the black layer, you can see what I deleted here. I didn't paint black, I deleted it. If I select the black layer and I come in and I delete something else, right? Because the blue is acting as a mask, I can't see all of the black I've deleted, but the white that's coming through is again, still just the layer behind it. Cool, is this making sense? Boy, this makes me look terrible. I need a white screen. That's much better. Okay, great. So any questions on any of that so far? Does any of that, all of that make sense? I'm gonna command Z backwards and undo all this so I just have my 3 surfaces. Cool, all right, I'm checking chat, give me a sec. Makes sense, cool. So going on from here, so now I want to pull a picture in. So normally I just drag and drop a picture, and you can do that from Google, you can do that from wherever you are. I'm going to pull up, I don't know if you guys, you probably can't see because it's a separate window on Zoom, but I'm going to just pull up, I have a couple of backgrounds to pick from. And I'm just going to drop all, my images in. So I'm in just a Finder window and I'm dragging and dropping and selecting and dropping all those in. So as I do that, it's going to layer each one and take a second. And this box, so it's going to try to treat it as a vector image, which means it's going to try to understand math. If whenever it has this box on it, that means if I make the image bigger or smaller, it's going to do a bunch of math to identify how those pixels should change size. It's not always perfect, but it gets better and better every update, okay? Once you turn something away from being, I'm hitting enter just to accept and allow each one to come in, and it's gonna fill the screen as much as it can with each image, okay? So over here, I have this little box here, okay? And what that's saying is this is a smart object. Smart object thumbnail. It's telling me it's a smart object. That's what that vector line is. The smart object is it's understanding that if I try to make it bigger, it will try to understand what that should look like, right? But every picture just contains pixels. If I zoom in on a picture, I'm going to turn this, I'm going to make this not a smart object. And so to do that, I click rasterize. 90% of the time I'll rasterize every layer I'm working with. When you bring a picture in, it automatically tries to set it to that protected layer. But you should only be using image. You shouldn't have to drastically resize an image. You should be finding images that fit what you're doing. Okay. But if I zoom in on this really close, we can actually see the individual pixels that make up a color. Okay. So this consists of blacks and grays in different shades. You can get super close and you can literally manipulate individual pixels, right? So anything that looked 8-bit from before, it was how many pixels it had. It had 8 pixels by 8 pixels. That's 8-bit, right? And that means you have 64 dots per inch. This is working in 300 dots per inch, right? So 64 compared to 300, you get way less of these. You can zoom in way further and get still very clear and crisp detail. The more detail you have, the better. So when we work in Photoshop as compared to Illustrator, we are destroying images. So we're working in pixel manipulation, and you can work in masks and prevent that, but I usually just work in destroying things. It makes it easier. So when you delete something, you are deleting it, right? So if I want to select this, wait, I have a chat, give me a second. Makes sense, great, awesome. I accidentally deleted when I was trying to select the screen. So if I'm trying to delete, undo, great. So if I'm trying to delete the background from this, I just want the whiteboard, okay? I don't want the shadow and I don't want the underneath. My normal instinct is to come in and just delete it to get a nice edge. So if I go super sharp and I cut a crisp line, it will look really harsh. Things normally fade out a little bit on the edges to make them look nicer when they overlap. So basically, if I come in here and I zoom in and I click my erase button and then I hold shift, okay, I'm going to turn off all these other layers behind here so that I can only see through to the oh, stop doing it. I'm going to see only through to the black layer, okay? So when I delete something, all of these layers, by turning the eyeball off, I can no longer see that layer, right? Actually, I'll go up on top of the blue layer. Okay, so now I have the blue layer behind this. If I delete this, I'll see behind it. So I'm gonna go, I clicked here. I'm gonna undo just to, yeah, okay, whatever. So you click your first dot and you can just hold the button and drag around to delete like I was doing earlier. But if you hold shift, it'll do it in a straight line. Okay, so if I click the first spot and then I come over here, and I know I want it to look like that, and I know it's a straight line, if I hold shift, it will give me a clear straight cut from my first spot to my next spot. So this is a pretty easy way to come in and start editing the background to make sure, or to cut it out, right? So you can select it or you can just do it, right? If you have a person, you can come in and just get as detailed as you want. When you have a tricky area, zoom in closer and make your size bigger, right? So this goes up to, this is 364 pixels, right? Pixel, each individual dot. So this is a circle that has a circumference of 364. You can go up to the thousands. You can type any number up to 5,000. You can go all the way down till it's just one actual individual pixel that it's deleting at a time, right? That's it, deleting one pixel at a time in a row. So if I held it down and I drew a line, it would delete those pixels one by one. That's some crazy detail. What I was getting at earlier is when you're trimming, you want to make it the largest size you can that's convenient. And with hardness, I always would trim it down to like 96, 90-ish, because a slightly softer line just makes it look more natural when you layer unrealistic objects. Okay, so if I do that, notice the difference between this and this, okay? If I zoom out a bit, one of them looks slightly more natural than the other. And it's weird when we start moving objects behind it. I'll leave the top dot so you can see the difference of it. But by doing that slight fade, it just makes it a little easier. All right, so I'm going to continue cutting out. I don't want the shadow. I'll make my own shadow. Note the corner, I can't get in as close as I want, which is fine. I have this little weird semicircle here. I'll come back for that in a minute. I'm going to keep on the same size I have. So I'm going to do as much as I can. Coming in and trimming. And I'm just holding shift and clicking individual points. And as I click, it draws me a straight line exactly to that point. And I have to be careful around the corners. Again, if I make mistakes, just Control or Command Z. And finalize that. Okay. Round that corner out a little bit. Okay, so now I've done a decent job selecting this. I want to come back in and refine this corner where I didn't have a good trim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly what I told you I'm going to do. I'm going to come in, I'm going to grab, I'm going to make it, let's say I'm clicking up and down arrows. Let's make it about that small. So now I can get even closer and I can come in and I can trim right up into that corner and then I'm good. And that I'll round this corner out a little bit, but now we got much more detail out of that cut. Okay, so now I want to get rid of all the white surround. If I hit Command T, I can select the object that I'm working on and we can see the borders of all of this object, right? So nothing is currently off screen, which is good. If I hit L or over here, lasso, you have multiple choices for these. If you hold the button down as you click it, you'll get these other options. The lasso tool works by basically you draw a line and it makes this, when you hold down your selection as you draw a line and when you let go, it makes a selection out of that. I could delete just that from the thing, right? I'm a fan of the polygonal lasso tool, which creates straight lines. So this selected area, I selected this specific area with that tool. And what that means is I can only make edits in that spot, right? So right now, if I tried to delete something out here, it wouldn't work. I could only delete something in this spot. To get rid of a selection, and those dancing ants is kind of how it looks like ants like walking in a circle. To get rid of that selection, if I hold Command and I hit D, it will just release the selection that I made. If I hit Command Z, I can reselect it so that it's just, I'm undoing my action and I can reselect. But I'm going to hit Command D so I can unselect. And then I'm going to come in with this tool, which is a straight line tool. And I'm going to just give myself enough clearance around the object because I don't want to delete any of those faded pixels. Because remember, I put that soft edge on it. And so I'm just going to select roughly that image. Somebody keep an eye on the clock and let me know when we're at 30 after so I can do a wrap up. Cool. So when I connect the two corners, it finishes it for me. So right now, the middle of this is selected. If I do what I did earlier and I hit Command D, delete, it'll fill that entire area in with black, right? I'm going to Command Z because I don't want that. What I want to do is I want to delete the surround. So if I hit Shift Command I, or if I come up in here and I go to selection, because I'm looking at the selection, it does inverse. So Shift Command I will do an inverse. So what it does is no longer am I selected in this little area here, but now I'm selected in this vast outside area and it goes all the way to the border. So basically the edge, the selection is all of this white, anything in between my dotted line and the other dotted line. Cool. So if I hit delete, Now I just got rid of that entire background. I Command D, and now I have just my dry erase whiteboard. Now say, I'm gonna come in here real quick and just show you real zoomed in. By doing that softer fade, that softer edge, what it does is it shows opacity, right? So this is the same white as this is, but it's only at like 50% opacity. If I move the dry erase board by hitting my left and right arrows, I can move it 1 pixel at a time, the whole object. You can see how it literally is just changing that 1 pixel. It's not that it's blue, it's that it is 1 shade lighter to white than whatever the background is. If I just have my white, I can't tell where I'm even working, right? So now here I'm kind of stuck and I don't know exactly where I am or where my trim is to be nice and clean. So a black background gives me that really defined look. A blue background shows me any errors that are either not black or white, okay? Any questions about how I did any of that or what any of that was? I'm jumping through things because I'm assuming you all watched the video and you have a basic understanding, but I want to answer questions when you don't know why or how or what I did. Cool? Awesome. So I'm going to get another dry erase board in here. So I'm going to take this one. Oh, yep, wait, I got a thing. It may be just cool. All good. Love. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to do my next dry erase board. Right now, if I turn this on, I can't see it. I'm going to turn off my first dry erase board because this one is the front layer, then my blue. So right now I can't see the next dry erase board because the blue's on. If I turn the blue off, I can now see it, or I could just drag it on top of it, okay? So now I want to do the same thing and I want to delete the background from this one. I hit Command T. So again, I can see my frame. I want to make sure I'm completely on screen. If I am not completely on screen, right? So maybe my image is a little bit behind because I resized it before I trimmed it. So now I have a little bit of blue or a little bit of this image outside that area. That means I cannot edit it. Think of the gray not as a background, but as a frame in front. It's covering my entire image. So I only get to see what I saved the same way a mask would. It's masking everything that goes beyond those lines. It protects it, okay? So then what I'm gonna go in here, first I gotta do, because I still have this smart object, I normally resize before I change it from smart object to just pixelated object, because once I do that, it's gonna become just pixels. Now it no longer thinks in a way that if I resize it, it'll do the math on it to calculate what each pixel should be as it expands. If you're working in Illustrator, that is solely vector related, and vector means math. So when you make a shape if you make a star in Illustrator, it does math, not pixels, to identify that shape so that you can make it infinitely larger, and it just does the math to fill in the gaps of what that should look like as it gets bigger. We work in Photoshop. Photoshop is the version that does pixel destruction, where we actually destroy objects. It's just slightly different in how it works, okay? You can do either and either also. This one's made for this, the other's made for that. All right, so I'm gonna come in here with my erase tool. That is way too small to do anything good with in this. So I'm gonna start with a larger size, 67 is fine, because it's a mostly square object. I'm gonna just pick a starting place and I'm gonna go ahead and start cutting this out. I don't like how this ripple looks. That ripple looks weird, and that's just how the pixels are fading out. So I'm gonna actually make this a little bit softer even. I don't wanna go too soft because I don't want it to feel like, yeah, it's gonna be like that when we're this close, but we'll see. It should be fine when we get further away. Ooh, bad. Trim, 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 trim. Come down here. That image may not be perfectly straight, so I'm gonna have to trim more spots. So I pick a spot, come down. That means this is slightly bowed into the middle and it's not exactly a straight line, but I still want it to look like a straight line, so I'm going to trim it accordingly. I'm trying to get rid of the white. Now, something else I could do. I'm gonna actually undo all this, because sometimes you have to do that. If you have a really ornate background, that's probably the way you'll actually wanna go. Whoops, get out of there. Ah, sorry. No, okay, here we go. All right, I was trying to redo something and I undid something. Rasterize. So if I want to do, I can do a selection where basically this magic wand tool, so these are different options for it. The magic wand tool is the one I'm going to go for. And this basically deals with this tolerance, okay? So when you select a pixel, it will find matching colors. Let me move this. And delete them, right? So if I use this magic wand and I select the white, it will find anything within 20 pixels either direction of color in similar realms, right? So that's why it's selecting all of this stuff, because this highlight here is the same color as this white. Now, there is another way around this. So if I lower this down to 10, it's only from the pixel I select, it's only gonna, it's a smaller range of different colors that it'll select, right? So if I pick one point right here, it will pick 10 different colors on all sides and it'll leave those in the selection as well. Whereas it was 20 before. So if I do this again, note it changes how many things and what's selected. If I make it 5, if I make it 1, 1 means it only picks that color, okay? So anything that is slightly different than that color, it won't pick. So if I go in and I look at this, even though this looks perfectly white, if I get as close as I can, this is one shade different than this, and that's why it's not selecting it. If I select 2 and I do it, it starts to fill in those gaps, because now in 2 directions, that is just slightly the right color and it will be exactly what I need, okay? The other thing that you should note about this is that it works in 2 different ways, contiguous and non-contiguous, okay? So this here. So contiguous, when it's not selected, when you're non-contiguous, when I click it, any pixel that matches in this image, it will find and select, which means coming in and selecting ones randomly on the inside, right? So if I do this at 10 pixels, 10 to 20 is usually the range I like that's comfortable. If I select out here at 10, it does select some of the stuff in here because it's close enough to its understanding. But if I do contiguous, what that means is it only selects things that are touching. So if there's another difference in pixel between me and that thing, it won't select that. It will only pick my frame. So watch if I do it again. Now it doesn't do anything on the inside because there are different colors that prevent it from going through. Does that make sense? Contiguous versus non-contiguous? Yes, no, maybe so. If I contiguous, which is when it selects only the area that you're talking about, if I select the black marker here, just the black, it will pick that color within relevance. If I do 20, I'll get more out of that. So, right? So now it's finding in more directions colors that are black. Notice that this color is not selected and this color is not selected, even though they're the same color. If I turn contiguous off, I'm going to Command D to unselect. Then I can come up here and click, and now it will select anything on the screen that is that same color in that same range, but anything whatsoever. Okay, make sense? Check in the chat. Check in the chat. Yes, and yes, great. So, wow. In here, the other one that we have that I like is the quick selection tool. And this one will select things surrounding. So you move it like a paintbrush and it selects based on what it thinks to be. So I'm unclick, or I'm clicking now as I'm moving, and then I stop clicking, but I click again. Now it's like moving, right? And then I can come up here, and if I hold Alt or Option, it does the inverse of that selection. So now I can refine my choice and select this a little bit nicer, right? And now I have a much better shot here. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to start selecting normally again, and it's going to put everything together. It'll do a little bit of its own math as it decides what a corner is. If I accidentally select too much, it'll start to pick up that thing. I can hit Alt and select, and now it starts to trim it back down. And I just kind of paint while holding Alt in that direction, right? And I can select normal. So Alt does opposite. Command will do, if I hold Command and select something, it'll do a second pick. So if I just hit this here, it'll do an additional thing, right? It'll select that surface. If I go to, it'll give it there. If I hit Command as I select, it'll allow me to actually move the image around. All right, it depends on what thing you're on. The way that I would do this one, so say I were going to do, oftentimes if I'm doing it, I will delete. I will just do an erase tool all the way around, just because it's the cleanest detail. But say I were to do a selection like this, I would do it as contiguous so that I don't get the things I don't want to get, and it gives me just that edge. But if I delete that, it has a shitty Photoshop edge. Okay, so if you've ever seen bad Photoshopping, how distinct that is, that's what happens when it just selects that tool. A way to avoid that, if I go into the select and then I do modify, I can smooth it or I can feather it. So if I smooth it, what it's going to do is it's going to take 3 pixels of that range and it's going to make them smarter, and it's going to soften that edge 3 pixels worth. So watch what happens when I hit enter. It softens a little bit, but when I hit delete, now, not great still. Let's do more than 3. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to select, let's do smooth, we'll do 10. Okay. It smoothed a bit too much. So now we lost that selection there because it doesn't understand that that is overlapping too much. But when you look at it, look how much nicer that is. Still not great, right? So what I would naturally do if I were doing this, I would just do my eraser method, zoom in. Because this is such a nice straight edge, it does allow itself to be quick, quick work as I just work my way around with my softened edge. Looks nice, round and round, right? So the best way to get detail is to zoom in really close and manipulate it as you see fit. All right, so I do also want to give this a little dimension, so I'm going to do that in a second. Nothing can stop us now. It's a catchy tune. And then I would come back in with a smaller brush later and trim that up, and I will continue to do that later. But I do want to show you a couple of things first, right? So I would come back in and I would trim that up with a smaller brush, and I will do that next class. I'll start there. Actually, I'll start with ideas and examples from y'all first if you have questions and things. But I do want to show you, if I bring up the first dry erase board, I can manipulate this in some smart ways and how it reacts to its environment very easily. I'm going to use the last 5 minutes on this. I realize we're at 30 after. So if I come in here and I right click it and I click blending options, I'm talking to it about how it's going to interact with the world in relation to light and dimension, okay? So bevel and emboss. Bevel and emboss is a way to take something and give it an edge that's a sharpened edge so that it feels, actually, I'm just gonna go ahead and give myself an example here of a line. So I'm just gonna use the brush tool to create a black, nope, that's blue because I'm on the blue layer. If I hit X, just X, it switches these two colors. So you could, if you have two colors you're working with, if I hit X, I can go back and forth between the two. But I'm just going to draw a black line. Oop, my opacity is low. My opacity is only at 25%. So I was only seeing that from when I was working on something before. So this is just a black line, but I want to show you what happens if I do these things to it. So it's on the same layer as the dry erase board. If I add bevel and emboss, it kind of makes it look like it's got dimension. It rounds it and makes it assume it's got light. If you look at the pipes in the projections designer video that I showed, or where we interviewed Devante, the pipes at the top are just black lines that have bevel and emboss. You can add contour, which is more detail. You can add texture to it. Then the other things you can do is you can add a stroke. So a stroke is an outline, right? So if I click on this, it's 7 pixels surrounding it are now black. So if you have a cartoon, you can create that by making this bigger or smaller, right? So if I do this, when I move this object around, it moves that stroke with it. Anywhere there's an outside edge, it will have a stroke of that many pixels. Let's come in here. Inner shadow makes it look like there's something going on the inside. So it adds depth to it from the inside. I'm just going to add, right? So this is the inner shadow. It makes it look like it's cut out. Inner glow, it glows on the inside. So if I make it super bright and make it larger, right, we can see how it actually glows, and it glows on the inside of the object working inside. Satin is a way to add a texture to it. Color overlay, you can take your entire surface and add a color. I'll turn off the bevel so you can see the difference. This is the bevel, right? Bevel and emboss. It adds shadow and adds highlight. If you do a gradient overlay, you can pick what gradient you want, and it does the same thing over that entire layer, but in gradient. Pattern overlay, you can add an image for pattern. Outer glow is what creates that glow, and you can choose how big it is, how small it is, how much it spreads, whether it's a really tight glow, and then how bright it is. Is it blinding? Is it non-blinding? Or you can add a drop shadow, and drop shadow. So let me do a mix up. So this has drop shadow and it has outer glow, but those things will follow it, right? So if I turn this drop shadow on and I make it a little bigger because the board's a little further away, and I change the size of it a little bit, it looks like it's got dimension away from the board, right? No matter where I take it, it will now manipulate the pixels behind it so that it fades from black to whatever the background color is, making it look like it has a shadow, and it does the glow the same way. It fades from white to whatever the outside or yellow or whatever I made it. Cool?